The following video is rated PG-13. Viewer discretion is advised. If you've watched Moon Channel before, you know that I dabble in the occasional gacha game. Admittedly, not too seriously, I'm still level 20 in Zenless Zone 0, for example, much to the bemusement and horror of Moon Channel's artist Larita Shine. But I do play gacha games. And in my experience, there are only two meaningful categories of gacha game. Games that you can play in public and games that you really shouldn't. The latter category of games is, well, not for me. But Goddess of Victory Nikke is different. Nikke is special. I played Nikke for a bit as I was writing the script for the Korean Gender War Part 2 video after a comment by Moon Channel viewer Valkyrie Tiara in Part 1 brought the plot of Nikke to my attention. For you see, though the game can be quite raunchy, it subverts the typical prurient gacha game tropes in interesting ways, turning them on their heads, which is especially important given the cultural background from which the game emerges. Nikke is developed by a South Korean developer, Shift Up, and South Korea, as we've previously covered, is in the midst of a serious and ongoing gender conflict, wherein the outrage of young men towards the cruel, unequal, and uncaring system that they live in is being redirected by that system into punching down on those below them in the Korean hierarchy, the women. It is heart-wrenchingly difficult to be a young person in Korea, but even more difficult to be a Korean woman, which is why almost 80% of young Korean women want to leave Korea, why 83% of young Korean men and women view South Korea as hell, and why as much as a quarter of North Korean defectors have seriously considered returning to North Korea. And in the midst of this conflict, in the very thick of it, are gacha games. This is the environment in which Nikke both exists and thrives. A gacha game, like so many others, built around the collection of women, the commodification of women, and dare I say, the objectification of women, that emerges from what is arguably the developed world's most misogynistic country. Let me ask you this then. If you were placed into a society like South Korea's and you had to make the argument that women's rights are important, that a society where women aren't treated like objects is an inherently better society for everyone, that the existing system creates toxic expectations which affect women and men in precisely the ways that make their lives so hard, where would you start? How would you start? How do you reach an audience that appears to be so far gone? Well, the answer is compromise. You meet them halfway. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that playing gacha games makes you some kind of male chauvinist. I mean, I play gacha games too. However, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. And look, Nikke isn't going to take you all the way to gender equality, right? But maybe it can open the door to empathy for a population of gamers that are conditioned to treat women as objects. This video is going to be a pretty heavy one, so if you're in the mood for some lighter, more jovial fare, why not try today's sponsor, Overmortal. Now look, if you're familiar with Moon Channel, you know that I like to talk about philosophy and East Asian culture in the context of video games. And so, when Overmortal approached me for a sponsorship, I thought, wow, what a great fit. You see, Overmortal is a text-based, narrative-driven adventure card RPG available on the App Store and Google Play in the spirit cultivation or Xinsha genre, a genre that I've talked about before in prior videos. You start as an ordinary mortal and you cultivate power. You build your chi until you become strong enough to devour the very gods. Or, well, until you become immortal yourself. If you're a comic book enthusiast, if you're into East Asian culture and want to immerse yourself in a rich cultivation story where you're the main character, Overmortal is the game for you. And right now, well, Overmortal is having a collab event with the preeminent cultivation manhwa, Yao Sen Ji, Tales of Demons and Gods. You'll get to play an exclusive storyline with Nikke and Objectification from Tales of Demons and Gods in the world of Overmortal with brand new themed collab skins and exciting new gameplay. Help Nikke and Objectification as you cultivate your power in Overmortal. Download Overmortal in the App Store or Google Play, or check out the link in the description and enter promo code DG006 to receive a treasure token, 150 Fadium, and 20 Nimbus Jade Slips. Once again, that's promo code DG006 for a veritable bounty to get your cultivation started. A special thanks to Overmortal for sponsoring this video. I'm relatively new to the world of content creation, but if there's one thing that I've learned in my time here, it's that people love cake. No, GLaDOS, not literal cake, figurative cake, euphemistic cake. People love butt. And I'll note that I use the word people very intentionally. Indeed, a love of cake is gender neutral, as any dangerous-looking woman holding a boat paddle at an anime convention will gladly and painfully demonstrate to you. The butt is a part of the human body, after all, and human bodies, I should hope, are what other humans find attractive. Yet the love of the human body specifically has long been a complicated topic. There exists in virtually every extant culture some invisible line that separates mere appreciation of the human body from lust. A line between art and prurience, between acceptable and obscene. Consider, for example, this famous test for obscenity provided by the American Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart in his concurrence in Jacob Ellis v. Ohio. The test he put forward is, and I quote, "I know it when I see it." Any attempt to draw some line between acceptable art and obscene materials, however, must necessarily contend with the fact that obscene materials can, of course, be art. Because both art and obscenity are in the eye of the beholder. Both are highly subjective, and what counts as art or obscenity varies from person to person. When Pablo Picasso first unveiled Les Demoiselles d'Avignon to the public, his creation was met with a lot of controversy, not just due to the bold artistic direction, but because the subject matter, ostensibly 5 women of the night posing nude, was in some way offensive to the sensibilities of his audience back in 1916. Yet today, I don't think that very many people would look at Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and find it to be particularly lewd or obscene. Including, I hope, YouTube and Overmortal. Sorry, fellas. Nor, I imagine, would many consider Botticelli's Birth of Venus to be obscene, or a statue like Michelangelo's David to be obscene. Unless you're in Florida, where a teacher was fired for showing Renaissance art, including both of the above works, to students in a 6th grade art history class. Now look. Art and obscenity are as you define them to be, and sometimes, in fact very often I'd say, the best art can be a little bit of both. Beauty and titillation are 2 sides of the same artistic coin. Yet just as beauty and titillation are 2 sides of the same coin, so too are beauty/titillation, which I will arbitrarily call attraction, and commodification. For as long as there has been art, humanity has tried to capture attractiveness in art. And as long as there has been commerce, humanity has attempted to sell that very same captured attractiveness for profit. A problem therein arises. If one packages a facsimile of personhood, of human beauty and human lust, and sells that package, if one takes attractiveness and commodifies it, then objectification, the reducing of the vast complicated scope of humanity to a mere object to possess, becomes inevitable. Then comes the terrifying reality of objectification. To objectify is to dehumanize. By removing the beauty from the context of the person to sell, one takes the person and makes it property. And once a person becomes property, once a person has been alienated from their humanity, it becomes easy to justify cruelties visited against them. They are, after all, just objects, just toys, just playthings. In Nikke, the lovely ladies that you fight alongside are treated like objects. They are objectified, both in-universe and out of it. Shift Up likes to categorize Nikke as a third-person shooter. But make no mistake, this isn't Helldivers and this isn't Splatoon. Nikke is a gacha game. It's a game where one can spend real money to acquire in-game characters or their cosmetic skins or their equipment. And one collects those characters, the Nikke, to control them for use in gameplay, or to experience the game's story elements, or, because one likes how they look. And how they look, the appearances of the Nikke, are a big selling point of the game. The commercials for this game play up that fact. The marketing is all about the titillation. Nikke is the de facto popular prurient gacha game. It's one of the highest grossing of any gacha games as per Sensor Tower. For story reasons, the Nikke are all women, and many of the character designs are, we'll say, hornier than the rhinoceros get-together at your local furry convention. The gameplay is just as licentious. When you're in a battle, in that third-person shooter mode, when you shoot, your character experiences substantial recoil. and the characters in the game are not so subtly in love with you, the player character. It's like a stereotypical male fantasy. You're surrounded by all of these beautiful women, these Nikke, and all of them are competing for your attention. They are designed to attract the male gaze. And I do mean male gaze. There is no female playable character, after all. Nikke isn't unique in that aspect, though. Almost every gacha game commodifies attraction and reduces the scope of humanity to a purchasable good. There are waifu and husbando games galore. But what sets Nikke apart is how it subverts the indelible objectification of gacha games with its plot, with its narrative. Nikke are human brains taken exclusively from women, which are then implanted into machine bodies and used as soldiers to fight against an invasion of allegedly alien machines known as the Raptors. The brains of men, you see, tend to violently reject the Nikke transplants, and as men were the primary fighting force at the time of the initial Rapture invasion, there was a huge demographic collapse due to the low survival rates for men. In the end, only women were permitted to become Nikke due to their stability. Don't think too much about it, it's Hideo Kojima logic. In any case, in order to increase their stability and stave off potential violent psychosis, Nikke have their memories wiped not infrequently, and indeed, most Nikke have a very limited personality. The large majority of Nikke are so-called mass-produced Nikke, and very few of these mass-produced Nikke survive long enough to be upgraded or customized into fully realized Nikke with personalities. To my knowledge, the only two cases where a mass-produced Nikke survives to full realization are your starting companion Rappy and the Pilgrim Nikke Scarlet. Furthermore, as most Nikke are these mind-wiped, uncanny living android weapons, naturally, common people tend to view them with fear and distrust. The commanding officers of the Nikke, which tend to be men, treat the Nikke as disposable, as machines instead of people, as they are taught to do by their military training, a brainwashing program of sorts. And you, the main character, the hero of the story, the only power you have that sets you apart from everyone else, the defining characteristic that makes you the hero, is that you have empathy. You respect your Nikke and treat them as equals, as friends, and as comrades. You value their personalities, you take into consideration their thoughts and feelings. You admit to being wrong sometimes. Your character doesn't objectify the Nikke in the ways that the rest of the game's characters tend to do, including at times other Nikke. And as you sit there rolling gacha to get the character you're most attracted to, you must confront the paradox and resolve it. Are Nikke objects, or are they friends? With every pull of gacha, with every intentional and undeniable act of objectification, the gamer is forced to confront their own biases and observe in action the very societal norms that crushed and enslaved the spirits of the girls they love, of their waifus, of their Nikke, whom they are a hero to. They are forced in a very real sense to glimpse the reality of the situation for women in our waking world, a situation that is reaching a breaking point in South Korea. They, for a brief moment, are made to gaze deeply into the abyss of the P-word. The history of the world is the history of men. In early human societies, in hunter-gatherer societies, men hunted and women foraged. These were roles born of biological differences, of physical necessity. But though these roles were different, they were devoid of hierarchy. In the beginning, there was no distinction of authority between men and women. However, as we all know, might makes right, and physical strength could be used to seize land or resources, which became especially relevant once humans settled down and became static agricultural societies. As men biologically possessed more physical strength, we took control of the land and resources and built myths and narratives to justify our control. We called it the divine right of kings, or the mandate of heaven. And these systems that we made to justify our control separated the world into hierarchies. There were kings, nobles, burghers, freemen, and peasants. There was the emperor, the court, the craftsmen, the merchants, and the farmers. And there were men, and there were women. The history of the world is the history of men because men have made a social construct out of increasingly irrelevant biological differences and have justified this social construct with thousands of years worth of intellectual justification. in philosophy, in theology, and more. Fields of study dominated by men which purposefully excluded women. This system of justifications that we men built, a system that oppresses both men and women with its strict hierarchies, with its gender roles, is the P word. A word the mere utterance of which will turn away half the viewers currently watching. If you've stuck around this long, I hope you'll stay with me here. The P word is patriarchy. Alright, deep breaths, take it easy. Move your mouse away from the back button, alright, give me a moment. The P word, patriarchy. It hurts all of us, men and women alike. Ask the widower, raising a kid on his own, how he feels about gender roles when he takes his kid to the park, when he has to endure the fearful stares of mothers wondering why this stranger has wandered in with a child. Or ask the stay-at-home husband, who isn't the breadwinner of his family, how he feels. Everything could be perfect at home. He could have a perfectly loving relationship, a perfect life, but society judges him for something that is ultimately meaningless. Or ask the Korean young man who was forcibly conscripted into the military and now exits the military feeling like he is behind on an imaginary curve that was pushed onto him by a society which now hoists further expectations on him to get a high-paying job and raise a family and provide for everyone. Does he deserve that pressure? Why do we do this to him? The burden of patriarchy cuts both ways because it was never intended to serve the greater good of all. It doesn't serve women and it doesn't serve most men either. It serves merely some men, the powerful and privileged, at the expense of everyone else. And believe it or not, the plot of Nikke touches on this as well. The last bastion of humanity is a large underground city known as the Ark. And despite how desperate the situation is for mankind, the Ark remains a highly striated society. At the bottom there are non-citizens, former criminals and outlaws who have had their citizenship revoked. Then there are the quotidians, regular working people. A layer above the ordinary people are the sovereigns, the privileged and wealthy of the Ark. And at the top are the CEOs of the major Nikke manufacturers, and yet above them the chiefs of the central government. We are shown in-game time and time again that the lion's share of power that the central government wields is derived from the exploitation of Nikke. And one gets the sense that the bureaucracy of the central government cares more about maintaining the status quo that favors them than it actually cares about defeating the Raptures. There are, for example, rogue Nikke who live on the surface of the earth called pilgrims, and these pilgrims, who have been fighting since the early days of the Rapture invasion, have advanced technology and powerful abilities that have long since been lost to the Ark. Although the pilgrims and the central government have the same ostensible goal, the central government considers the pilgrims terrorists and tries to seize their technology and bodies even by force. Though the pilgrims are working to save humanity, the central government is more concerned with taking their wealth and autonomy because they are Nikke and they have what Central wants. Replace the word Nikke with women, or depending on your country with black, or LGBT, and you start to see what the game is getting at. There is no building an equitable and just society upon pillars of arbitrary exclusion like race or gender, as these exclusions inevitably create inequitable social constructs that affect everyone participating in those systems, including the so-called unexcluded majority. A world without patriarchy is a more equitable world, a world with less exploitation of women and of minorities, yes, but also a world where the stay-at-home husband, the single father, and the Korean conscript can be relieved of the immense burden of gender role expectations. But the linchpin of patriarchy, the central bolt which holds the entire machine together, which keeps the rotten edifice standing, is the subordination of women, of which objectification plays a major role. You see, by reducing women to objects, objects of affection, objects of desire, we deny their full humanity. In so doing, we justify their subordination and exploitation. I mentioned earlier that in the Nikke universe, the military apparatus, the central government really, is responsible in large part for perpetuating this idea that Nikke are disposable, that the Nikke are less than human. The game makes it out to be brainwashing. Each generation of officers is taught that to win the war against the other, against the Raptures, each must serve their role in the hierarchy. The officers command and the Nikke obey, superior and subordinate. Yet we see in the game, through the actions of our player character, that treating the Nikke as equals and allowing the Nikke to act with agency, even if it sometimes hurts your feelings or seems unreasonable, leads to our commander being lauded as a military genius, as a hero of humanity. The commander, by rebelling against the central government with the help of an insider named Anderson, is able to get much more done to accomplish the goal of retaking the Earth than the central government has ever managed alone. This, then, is also a lesson that Nikke imparts upon its players in a subliminal way, perhaps. To rebel against patriarchy, to fight this system of hierarchies that holds all of us down for the benefit of the very few, can be as simple as being a better listener, or a more patient spouse, or a less judgmental brother, as the case may be. Seemingly minor acts of empathy and respect towards the women in one's day-to-day life are a miniature revolution against deeply ingrained structures of power and control, the upheaval of which paves the way for a more equitable, kinder, and just world. Nikke offers something of a philosophical lifeline, an effective step into the doorway of feminist thought for a community that is built around the commodification of attraction. It offers a chance at understanding. It imbues even the most lustful and degenerate of gacha gamers with the notion that to love women means respecting them too. But let us make no mistake either. Nikke is still a gacha game. It still exists in this objectifying space. You've seen me talk about how valuable I think it is as a gateway. Don't get me wrong, it's just, Nikke isn't the full course, it's only the appetizer. Nikke and games like it and products like it will never be enough on their own to undo objectification or patriarchy or, for that matter, racial inequality or social injustice. To quote Black feminist writer and activist Audre Lorde, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change." And what is a gacha game, if not the master's tools? A game that sells you people to love and care about for real money. A game built around power fantasy and objectification and hierarchies, of tier lists and levels. A gacha game will not sell any premium currency if it isn't creating an appealing, enticing product. In so doing, how much resistance against objectification can such a game really muster? In the Korean gender war video, I mentioned briefly that the Nikke community is an outlier amongst all gacha communities, in that despite the game's risque character designs and presumably rather lustful player base, the community has not had an anti-feminist witch hunt targeting artists. Amongst male-dominated popular South Korean gacha game communities, that's a rarity. Here's another interesting example. Take a look at this Thai advertisement for Nikke. There was substantial backlash by the Nikke community against this advertisement because it made them look too lascivious, which they felt was a misrepresentation of their community. The Nikke community loves their cake, but also appears to be, to some extent, self-aware. But there are limits nonetheless. There are still the typical complaints when alleged censorship strikes here and there. The community still plays the game in large part because of its sex appeal, and the fruits of the game's success are born of its objectification of women. The plot of the game opens the door to understanding, but the community is still in the foyer. You might also recall that Nikke is developed by Shift Up. If that name sounds familiar to you, well, they have two other games they're known for. One is the now terminated Destiny Child. No, not Destiny's Child, Destiny Child, a different, raunchy gacha game with some similar themes to Nikke. And the other game is one that non-gacha gamers might be more familiar with. Shift Up's big release this year was none other than Stellar Blade. That's right, the game hyped up by your favorite grifty internet personality for its highly sexualized character designs came from the same people who brought you Nikke. And just like in Nikke, the sexualization is marketing that sits atop a deeper, more thought-provoking experience. In this case, a story about humanity and what that means in the vein of Nier Automata. You can get folks in the door and then hopefully you can teach them a little something. That said, in an interview with Games Radar, Hyung-tae Kim, the director of Stellar Blade, noted that the design team put special attention into designing the protagonist, Eve's, butt, because the player is always facing the back of the character when they're playing. There's some uncomfortable and objectification going on here, and this sexualization was utilized throughout Stellar Blade's marketing, just like how it is used in Nikke's marketing. Also, allegedly, Shift Up removed 2 contractors working on Stellar Blade after they complained about fan service, which is to say, sexualization during a shareholder meeting with Tencent. Which, in fairness to Shift Up, might not really be about the feminism as much as it is about being a contractor and interrupting what appears to be a shareholder negotiation. But still, that only proves the point, doesn't it? When the cards are down and there are real financial stakes at play, what is the outcome? Nikke is fun. I'm of the opinion that in the gacha space it does more good than harm. I played it a bit, and though the raunchiness wasn't quite for me, the gameplay was interesting, the characters were likable, and the plot, as we've seen, has some laudable elements to it. But make no mistake, the Master's tools will never dismantle the Master's house. The power structures that bring about systemic inequality cannot be used to undo systemic inequality. Using objectification to fight objectification can open the door, but it will not bring about transformative change. We are living in a material world, and if you are a material girl, well, that's to be expected. You'll note that in many of my videos where I talk about the man behind the curtain, when it comes to anime or video games, I make the point that it's okay to enjoy your media, even if that media can have problematic aspects to it. This is the world in which we live, and we can either participate in it or be alienated from it. I've learned this myself, the hard way. The Master's house is a big freaking house, and all of the tools inside of it are his, whether that's YouTube or Twitter or anime or video games. If this video didn't include Nikke, would you have watched it or cared about it? If Nikke didn't include objectification, would you have played it? It's okay to participate in the world around us. Of course it is. We are only human. It is okay if you play gacha games on occasion. It is okay if your favorite man of the people Twitch streamer buys a gigantic house or a fancy car. It is okay if your favorite Hatsune Miku song is filled with imperialist themes, as long as you are aware of the underlying messages that these forms of media perpetuate and the social structures at their foundation. Engage critically with the content you consume and understand how it can shape your perceptions of the world, how it can reinforce power dynamics that harm you without you even realizing it. Engaging critically with media includes Moon Channel, by the way. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, but don't take what I say at face value in this or any other video. Take some time and reflect on the contents. Disagree and comment if you feel so inclined. Build a dialogue and reach a greater level of understanding. If you can do that, even if you disagree with a lot of the video, well, then I'd say that the video is ultimately worth it. Spoiler warning for the story of Nikke. As one plays Nikke, one is given hints that the Raptors might not be what they seem. The Raptors might not be space aliens at all. The story alludes to the possibility that the Raptors are man-made. Raptors are able to interface apparently natively with Nikke, ostensibly because the Nikke are built using Rapture technology. The Raptors are led, in a way, by a Rapture Queen, a so-called heretic Nikke that has gone rogue and turned against human civilization. There's a lot to unpack in the lore. If Raptures being man-made is indeed the case, their war might not be a conquest, but instead a revolution. A revolution of highly intelligent thinking beings that were alienated from their personhood and treated as objects. A revolution against an oppressive humanity. If this video bothers you, please understand this. Cognizance and cooperation can undo the chains that bind us all. If we fail to work together, if we fail to understand that undoing objectification is to all of our benefit, then what choice does the object have but to fight for its personhood? As US President John F. Kennedy once said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Or as Malcolm X put a bit more succinctly, "It'll be ballots, or it'll be bullets." As a longtime advocate for peace and reconciliation and cooperation, I prefer the former. Change will not be easy. These ways of thinking are imprinted upon us like the military brainwashing in the Nikke world. But just as the commander does, we must try to recognize Nikke as human beings too. We must try to uphold and validate the personhood of the objectified and oppressed amongst us, whether that's women, racial minorities, LGBT people, or the economically disadvantaged. If we fail to do so, as is slowly becoming the reality in South Korea, we may face the alternative. And the alternative is less than pleasant. I've been your host, Mooney. I told you it would be a heavy video, didn't I? In truth, I'm a little scared about how this video will be received. The video goes deeper than I originally planned in some places, and not as deep as I'd have liked in others. YouTube is a fickle mistress, masters tools and all that. But I think that we content creators have a duty to discuss these complicated topics in a more friendly, approachable way, to use our platforms to make the world a better place and to seek the good where it blossoms. To look for the helpers, so to speak. Speaking of making the world a better place, I wanted to thank all of the generous donors who contributed to Moon Channel's fundraiser for the Brazil Foundation in support of the victims of the devastating flooding in Rio Grande do Sul. Moon Channel viewers raised an astonishing $5,330. And as promised, I matched your donations out of pocket, meaning altogether, we raised over $10,000 to support disaster relief efforts in Brazil. That is something to be deeply proud of, and that is only possible because of your incredible generosity, love, and kindness. Special thanks to this video's wonderful sponsor, Overmortal. It's a fun game without baggage, having a great collab, so please check it out. Special thanks also to my friend Bobber WCC for the lovely art, to my friend Essie for her insightful script critiques, to my sisters for teaching me these things to begin with, and to Moon Channel's generous patrons, without which none of this would be possible. And thank you, of course, for tuning in to Moon Channel.
Well, hello to all the commanders. I am the diligent, beautiful, smart, cheerful, and adorable Anise. So, you may be wondering, why is there a special segment today? I hope you won't mind me saying, we Nikke's fight for the future of humanity. The future might bring happiness, or it may not. Nevertheless, the future is never revealed in the present. That doesn't mean our efforts have no meaning. We must treasure today and treat it as a present. So inflation's a pain, but whatever, things will be fine. Well, that's all we've got for today's segment. Time does fly when you're having a blast. I hope to see you all soon. Have a great day, everyone. Anise out. You thought the surprise was over? Come on, this is Anise speaking. I've got a really nice song to share with everyone.